Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Use Cover Crops Like a Pro on Your Farm webinar. My name is Catherine Garcia, and I will be your moderator for the webinar. In 1959, AgSource was formed to serve Wisconsin dairy farmers. What began as a regional dairy records processing cooperative has now grown into the AgSource of today, serving industries that span the entire agricultural ecosystem, from cutting-edge soil, plant tissue, and water testing to agronomic consulting and full-service DHI testing. AgSource at its core is a source of truth. One test at a time, we help our clients make the best decisions, always grounded in data. I'm excited to introduce Chris Clark. Chris Clark, a CCA, works for AgSource Laboratories. She is passionate about agriculture and has special interest in soil health and cover crops. Chris worked with AgSource lab technicians in the R&D team to develop AgSource's cover crop biomass test. Since 2011, she has helped clients understand their agronomy test data from AgSource to help make informed decisions not only for healthy cover crops, but healthy soil. I'd now like to turn it over to Chris to tell you a little bit more about herself and introduce our other speaker, Nick.
Thanks, Kate, and welcome everyone, and thank you for your interest in watching this agronomy webinar. I think between myself and Nick, everyone listening today is going to hear something useful. Once again, I'm Chris Clark, a certified crop advisor for AgSource Laboratories. I'm coming to you today from Wisconsin. I know that should be a poll question we should ask one time in the future, because I know we've got multiple states that AgSource has clients from. I also represent AgSource testing labs that are in Iowa, Nebraska, as well as 2 labs in Wisconsin. We also have a skilled team of AgSource crop consultants with expertise in GPS soil sampling, precision agriculture, crop scouting, and regulations for manure and nutrient management plans. Through working directly with farms, they encourage the use of cover crops in fields where it's needed. And they've also learned about cover crops side by side with farmers, much like our guest today, Nick Guilette. Nick is a CCA at Ebert Enterprises and has not been afraid to jump into cover cropping with both feet, literally. On the 3,000 cow dairy in rural Algoma, where he works, Nick advises over 6,300 acres and uses cover crops to be able to make more manure application opportunities, be able to produce some additional feed, and protect soil and water, which is a priority in the dairy as well as on his own family farm. He serves on the Peninsula Pride Farms, which is a farmer-led watershed group in that area, and serves as a co-director to the Door Kewanee Demo Farms, which is a partnership between NRCS and the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, where conservation practices are put on exhibit for the public as well as other farmers to see. I know that he has some really good stories and photos to share with you today of what's worked, and I'm sure he'll share what hasn't worked as well. Take it away, Nick.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for that introduction. Well, let's talk about using cover crops like a pro on your farm. Chris and I have had some friendly banter back and forth about this subject. She says that I am an expert. I'd like to think that I'm continually trying to learn. So a little bit more about me. I was born in Kewanee County and raised, obviously that's northeastern Wisconsin. Grew up on a family farm, which was a swine farrow to finish operation. I was very involved in 4-H and FFA. I attended the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, where I received a degree in general resource management and a soil science minor. I've been a certified crop advisor since 2004, and for most of my career, I've been an agronomist and nutrient management planner. And I'd like to think that I'm an advocate for both agriculture and conservation. So why all the talk about cover crops and soil health? Well, here in northeastern Wisconsin, which I'm sure is true of many other areas in the country, water quality issues are a part of that equation and probably part of the reason we've gotten to where we are. Here in Kewanee and Door County, we have karst topography. The Niagara Escarpment is the bedrock formation that is underneath our feet. It's the same bedrock formation that Niagara Falls spills over. We've got fractured bedrock under shallow soils in some of the areas. And in other areas, we have a lot of soil before we reach the bedrock. So here in northeastern Wisconsin, we have challenges both with surface water and potentially also with groundwater concerns. In the picture that we've got on the slide right now, we can see an aerial shot overlooking Green Bay. It's the Fox River emptying into Green Bay, and that chocolate colored milk or water is not what we want to see. And it has been part of the driving factor, I think, to where we are today with cover crops and soil health. Here in northeastern Wisconsin, fishing is an important part of the tourism industry. And as farmers on the landscape, we're also part of the solution to taking care of groundwater challenges. So when we talk about soil health, I'll let you decide, looking at these pictures as to if this is healthy soil or not. But the NRCS has given 5 principles of soil health, and they are: keep the soil covered or armored, minimize soil disturbance, increase plant diversity, try to maintain a continual living root even through the winter, and the integration of livestock, whether that be through grazing or manure applications. At Peninsula Pride Farms, there was a conversation started back in 2016. A group of area farmers and agribusiness people got together and decided decided to form a farmer-led watershed, Peninsula Pride Farms. So with the assistance from Wisconsin DATCAP grants, we're a group that looks at promoting conservation practices, cover crops, soil health, low disturbance manure applications, and many more things are the challenges that we look at. We try to maintain an attitude of continuous improvement. And our vision here on the peninsula is that we can have clean, safe water and a thriving agricultural community together on the Door-Kewanee Peninsula. We achieve this through field days, and each year we have an annual meeting. Once Peninsula Pride Farm was formed, another group formed, the Door-Kewanee Demonstration Farm Network. It's a partnership between NRCS, DATCAP, and Peninsula Pride Farms. It consists of 4 farms: Brycycle Farm, Kinnard Farms, Augustine Farms, and Deer Run Dairy. And we try to highlight traditional and non-traditional conservation practices on field days and tours. Some of those tours that we do occur on a monthly basis, usually during the growing season, and we've called them conservation conversations. It's a group, or it's a event, low key. We get together and we have conversations about the practices that we're looking at, and they've been a big hit. So when it comes to establishing cover crops on our farms, there's endless options in which we can take or look at. One of those being after small grain harvest, possibly at interseeding. One of our big and very common practices is after corn silage, and that cover crop may be just that, a cover crop, or it might be utilized for forage. If it's used for cover, we might take that into a planting green scenario the next spring. We've looked at cover crops, utilizing cover crops to no-till alfalfa into. And so I'm going to look at a lot of these things here a little bit more in the slides that I share, and some of the valuable lessons that we've learned along the way. So when we think about establishing cover crops after a small grain harvest, this summer harvest of these small grains allows for a very big window in which to get them established. It allows us some time to think about what kind of species we want to make up in our blend, or maybe it's a single species. Maybe we're going to have manure that's applied. That manure application could occur before or after onto a living crop. But we really need to think about the goals of that cover crop, because it might dictate the decision-making process between the establishment of that cover crop all the way to next year's primary crop. We might be looking at reducing erosion, producing forage. In a summer scenario like this, maybe it's an emergency forage crop that we need because we lost a lot of our alfalfa the winter prior. Maybe it's a scenario in which we can produce nitrogen for the next year's corn crop or capture excess nutrients. But some of the things we need to think about is we could produce too much residue to contend with for next spring. And that could be an issue depending on if you're a beginner or maybe you have many years of experience and you're not so afraid of the biomass that's produced. Is your field a wet field? Maybe having a plant survive the winter is a better idea than having a single species or all species that winter kill. But these are all things to think about, and the planning process and working through that process is very important. So when we talk about length of growing season, the picture on the left is from August 29th. And we've got a cover crop well established there. It's maybe 4 to 6 inches tall, and it's well on its way. But we have to remember, we've got all of September, likely most, if not all of October, in which that crop can grow. And then on the picture on the right, we can see the four-wheeler parked in a cover crop field on November 29th. And there's a tremendous amount of biomass out there. Now, that biomass can be a good thing, or it might be a challenge depending on how comfortable you are with that. If this was a wet field and there were no living roots left, no species that was going to overwinter the winter, that could be a reason for concern, because that amount of biomass will lay down and then allow or cause a lot of issues for drying up the following spring. But I do know that there's winter rye in that mix, and that winter rye is the living root that will survive winter and utilize water the following spring and cause that soil to mellow out. So in this particular case, the farm's not as concerned with that tremendous amount of biomass out there. Now, I'd be lying if I was to say I was not a wildlife enthusiast and a deer hunter. So there's a lot of additional benefits that come with cover crop blends that are allowed to grow and produce as much biomass as that November 29th picture. They allow fields in which deer and other animals can forage in. There are additional bedding areas when compared to if that field was chisel plowed from fence line to fence line and there was no cover out there. But more importantly, I think looking at the squirrel on the right is the message I'd like to get across. Don't be afraid to try new things. Maybe we're going to reduce or increase our seeding rates. Maybe we're going to change the species in our go-to blend. Maybe we want to add a legume in there and see if we can produce some nitrogen. You know, and if we do add a legume in there, do they still mellow out the ground like a winter rye cover crop does? Those are all things we're learning and trying as we go. When we talk about seeding rates, one of the first things that I have to get across is if you're in a government cost share contract, obviously there will be language in there about the seeding rate or minimum seeding rate that you have to use, and that dictates how you proceed. But if we're doing a single species, we might have a higher seeding rate than if we're doing a blend. If there's manure in the equation, you might get more growth out of your cover crop than if there wasn't manure. Are we taking that cover crop for forage? At what point in the fall is this cover crop getting planted? A cover crop planted on August 15th will obviously produce a lot more biomass than if it was planted on November 15th. So back 10 to 15 years ago, when we started into our cover crop journey on our own personal farm, it was a single species recommendation of tillage radish, and that was at a rate of 6 to 10 pounds per acre. Even if I was doing a single species, I don't know if I would use 6 to 10 pounds per acre anymore, but that was the information we had and we learned from it. Today in a blend, I recommend about 1 pound per acre, if not even less, because tillage radishes are very competitive getting started, whereas some of our other cover crop options take a little more time and can get out competed by that radish. On the next slide, we see a tractor in which the surface application of manure is occurring over the living cover crop. Now, at the time of that application, we might think, as we look at this, the upper right-hand corner of the picture, we're like, oh, that doesn't look the way I want it. But if you go away, if you come back in 10 days, it's probably going to look like right over the hood of the tractor, lush and vibrant and doing exactly what we want it to do. And we have to think about that nutrient application that's occurring. It's getting tied up in that living cover crop, and it's getting relayed to next year's primary crop in a safe manner. And that's ideally what we want to be happening on a surface application of manure. Now, one of the things with manure applications is every year and every field is different. And we can only adjust the application rates based on what we're seeing in the field. So that's an important thing to take into consideration. I can't sit here and tell you that you can put X amount on in a surface application and you'll be perfectly fine, because every field, every year is different. So as we move into a different practice of interseeding, this is a practice in which cover crops are established when the corn is about V4, V6, maybe 6 to 8 inches, 10 inches tall at the most. And we're, in this case, in the picture, we've come in with a specialized no-till drill, and we've got that cover crop growing between the corn rows. Other ways in which this can get established is maybe it's blended with urea at a side dress application and surface applied out there. Or to take it one step farther, we'll take, after that urea and the cover crop is broadcasted, you could take a cultivator and incorporate that to get a little bit more soil to seed cover. Some of the things to consider when doing this is a lot of times our corn programs have residuals in the herbicide. Some of these residuals can affect whether a cover crop can get established. And all I can say is you have to consult the label for more information on that. But we have had success with lowering application rates and the amount of chemical that goes out there. A lot of times we'll plant 5 pounds of annual ryegrass, 5 pounds of medium red clover, and another 5 pounds of crimson clover. And that's been a successful interseeding in our area close to the lakeshore. I do have radish on there. Again, some of those same words of caution, radishes can be competitive, and we don't want our interseeding to outcompete the corn. So on the next slide, we look at just exactly what we want to be happening in an interseed situation. We want that cover crop to get just big enough and then sort of become dormant through the growing season under the corn canopy until harvest, which we can see on the right side from a corn silage field. That radish is taking full advantage of the sunlight. In the picture on the left, it was sitting there smothered for a while, but as soon as that corn silage was harvested, the cover crop was already planted, ready to capture the sunlight that was going to become available once that corn was out of the way. It's a way of spreading our workload so that we don't have to get all our cover crops established after the corn harvest. We can spread some of that workload out during the growing season. So let's talk about probably one of the most common cover crop practices in northeastern Wisconsin, and that's establishment of winter cereals after corn silage harvest. Timing of the cover crop is critical. We've got limited growing season left. In the picture on the left, you can notice we've got the planter and the chopper in the same field. Oftentimes our harvest operations are what take priority, and rightfully so. But if we can get another person in the planter tractor moving and get that guy seed and keep the operations flowing, we'll have a successful cover crop with the winter cereals. Winter rye is one of those. It's quite resilient. It will germinate with temps near freezing and often seems to green up with warmer stretches during the winter, which we've seen over the last several years. We get those warmer stretches, and it seems the winter rye kind of perks up, then goes dormant, and it's ready for next spring. So when we talk about seeding rates, in the picture on the right, we've got a planter no-till planting green. This cover crop was intended just for that cover crop, not for forage. In those cases, we've had success with seeding rates as low as 25 to 50 pounds per acre. If we're getting that cover crop out there early, mid-September with manure applications over the top, we're probably going to be at the lower end of that 25. If it's getting later into the season, maybe we want to bump that up. But we're not looking for a tremendous amount of growth. We're just looking for enough cover crop material and plant material out there to help reduce erosion and relay those nutrients into the next season. Just a little cover crop can go a long way. So we've got so here I took some pictures back in the fall of 21. On the left side clump of winter rye, you can see a group of winter rye plants that was planted on September 16th. And one thing to note about these two pictures is the pictures were all taken on December 3rd. The picture, the individual plant is just that, one individual plant from that group of plants, you know, in that 3.5 inch area. But on the right side picture, these upper pictures were planted, the winter rye was planted on October 20th. And you can see where I've sketched in my soil surface line there. So the upper side of the paper there, that's winter rye you would see driving down the road at 60 miles an hour. But in the lower left-hand corner, I've got a planting date of November 4th. And you can see that one of those plants is just starting to peek out of the soil surface compared to the November 9th in the lower right-hand corner. They just started to germinate, but they didn't get out of the ground. And a lot of times we think, well, our cover crop was unsuccessful. But on our winter cereals, they often say, if we can get that cover crop, that seed to germinate, it will be there and it'll be ready to capture that heat in the spring of 22. So just understand that we can get winter cereals established quite late. They might not look like much in the fall, but next spring there is a possibility that they'll be there and bring a lot of benefits to the soil. So on the next slide, I believe.
Hello everyone, we're out here at Ebert Enterprises. We're looking at a field of winter rye that we're currently planting corn in a no-till plant green scenario. Last fall we did a surface application of manure out here. September 25th we no-tilled 40 pounds of winter rye into it. Then we came back and we built we zone tilled it, where we build zones. And if you look closely here as I come down to the ground, you can see these zones where there's a little bit less winter rye in them, and those are GPSed on 30-inch rows. And so this area right here has not been planted yet. We've got the zone there where there's less winter rye, and we're going to no-till the corn in. And if I jump over 30 and then another 30, you can see where we've got winter rye and the corn planter had gone down the row. As the tractor's getting closer here, we're using those GPS coordinates, coming back, no-tilling, while we're planting into those zones. And as you look across the field, after the corn planter has gone through, it looks like a field of winter rye, which leads to tremendous amount of cover, protects from soil erosion, contributes a lot to soil health and the microorganisms that go along with it. So as the planter's coming in here, you can get a glimpse of the corn planter in action as it goes by me. We'll take a look at those row units effortlessly going through. So again, field of winter rye, no-till planting corn into it. In a couple days we'll come in here, terminate this. The winter rye will contribute to soil health. Earthworms will feed on this all season long. And you can see some of the rows as we've got them planted. And just the tremendous amount of biomass that's left out here. I think I stated earlier, the winter rye is about knee high, and that's plenty tall for us. It's time to terminate that cover crop and get this corn off to a good start. So
All right, well, I hope that video came across good. Not always the biggest fan of videos on PowerPoints, but I thought that was well put together and kind of an ideal scenario. I'm going to take you through a story that we had occur back in 2019. And so everyone might be thinking, well, planting green is a good thing, but there can be challenges with it. And winter rye is a very aggressive cover crop, not to scare you away from using it because it has tremendous benefits, but it does progress and go through its life cycle very early. And back in 2019, we had one of the wettest years on record. So the picture on the left probably looks very similar to the video that we just seen. That was May 10th. The field wasn't quite ready for planting, but we were waiting and for it to dry up just a little bit better, so we didn't go and mud that corn crop in. May 17th, forecast is not good. We pick up 3 to 4 inches of rain, and now we're stuck waiting for things to dry out much longer than what we anticipated. Picture on the right is June 7th. We've got winter rye that's headed out, probably somewhere about chest high, and we have a monster on our hands, and we're not sure how this is going to turn out. But I'll take you through what the season looked like. In this next slide, we are looking at a picture of the tractor and planter going through the winter rye cover crop. A lot more than we had planned to contend with. However, remember some of my comments about having a living root out in your field in spring to help dry out the field. Notice the row behind the left dual on the tractor. That soil looks very mellow and something that is about ideal to plant into. Sorry about that. So when we talk about winter rye and planting green, I had to interject this, especially seeing the number of agronomists on the presentation. This is absolutely an opportunity where we can build relationships with our farms. They'll learn to trust us and we trust them. You know, field observations are a must. Scouting is a must. We need to be watching for if we need to respray, if we need to do something with our nitrogen management program. Maybe we need to pull soil samples in which to further strengthen our decision to apply additional nitrogen. There could be insects that become a challenge. So all these things are basically boots on the ground. It's the best option we've got, and scouting will tell us and lead us the way through this process. Planter setup. Now we don't need a shiny new no-till planter to be able to plant in this scenario. Remember how mellow that ground was behind the tractor. This is where our goals come in. I'd rather plant into the picture on the right. However, we have succeeded in scenarios like the picture on the left. I would say use extreme caution if spraying the winter rye off before planting into it. The rye can quickly become very stringy and cause issues with the planter. Some people have used roller crimpers in scenarios like this, and then the row cleaners from the corn planter will help open up the row and allow sunlight to come through. In 2019, we did not do that. We had planted just as that lower picture showed. So June 25th, we've got the winter rye terminated, and there is a ton of material out there. You can kind of see corn plants coming through there, but we're not feeling very good at this point in time. But we stuck with it. July 8th, starting to see a little bit more hope, but not as proud as we, it's not the cornfield we're going to take and show our neighbors. But on July 30th, I realized this corn crop may not be as far along as we want to, but neither were the neighbors that were conventionally tilled. And I know the neighbor's field did not look as even as that field. It was perfectly even from one end of the field to the other and showed what soil health was doing in a scenario where we had, more rain than what we had wanted to do. Nitrogen management is a must in a scenario like this. Pull your PSNTs to confirm what you might be suspecting with some yellower looking corn. In our experiences, we usually apply 60 to 80 units of nitrogen in a commercial form earlier than what we would side dress. As you can see the lower left picture, that might be about side dressing time, but in the upper right picture on the floater, you know, where the floater is applying urea, that is, you can barely see the corn plants. So we've moved our side dress application earlier, and basically we're allowing the winter rye decomposing to be our later nitrogen as the season progresses. Now, one of the things that picture with the floater is probably more of the ideal situation, and our growth stage of the winter rye can affect the C to N ratio. And also, as that plant grows bigger and bigger, it's going to use more and more nitrogen, and we need to be aware of that and ready to supplement that nitrogen. Insect management is another challenge that can come with the plant green scenario. These fields are very attractive to moths coming up on the early southerly winds to lay their eggs into, because at that time of year, not much else is green on the landscape. Some years it can be a problem, as the picture is on the right. That was 2019. It seemed like we got hit with every scenario possible in that year. But since then, we haven't seen as much pressure in our cornfields on with armyworms. Traded corn can be one of the solutions to helping to protect against the armyworms. So on the picture on the left here, a couple days before harvest, October 25th, picture on the right, October 28th after harvest. You can see the tremendous amount of biomass that is still left out there, but nowhere near what it looked like early in spring. And you can notice how well the vehicles, the dump carts and choppers carried across this field. And I've got a couple other pictures to help show a little bit more of that. So when we talk about the value of soil health, so very often we talk about bushels or tons, and that is part of the equation. But there's more to the story when it comes to the value of soil health. When we look on the picture on the left with the pocket knife and right above it, we can see how well those dump carts carried across that cornfield with all the winter rye stubble when compared to the picture on the right, where that's a neighboring cornfield, and a lot of cornfields back in the fall of 2019 looked like this, ruts from one end of the field to the other. How much more fuel, wear and tear on equipment, and loss of soil health occurred. And that loss of soil health can come in the form of compaction, and that can last for years to come. At that moment, we were worried about getting the job done, and rightfully so. But there's more to soil health than just bushels and tons. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit away from cover crop for cover and talk about forage. In the picture here, we were harvesting a winter trit or winter rye field, and those are some tremendous rows. When we think about cover crops for forage, usually we need to increase the seeding rates. When we talked about the cover, we were talking 25 to 50 pounds. Here we're talking 80 to 120 pounds of seed per acre, if not more. But one of those, going back to those goals, we need to know what animals we're trying to feed this to. In this scenario, we're feeding them to heifers, where it's more about the quantity than the quality when we think about a dairy ration. If we were going to be feeding this to dairy cows, we would have harvested it much sooner and tried to get the feed value up a lot more, to be a lot higher. One of the ways in which we can increase the feed value on winter cereals is with the application of nitrogen and sulfur, and that seems to have an increase in our feed quality. In this next slide, we've got a scenario that occurred here at Ebert's back in the spring of 2021. The picture on the right, I'm standing in a winter triticale field that is shoulder to head high, and it was one of our best biomass years that we had here on the farm. This crop was planted in September, on September 30th, and planting date is important. As some studies done by Tom Kilser, a CCA with advanced ag systems on the East Coast, show as much as 30% yield difference can occur when planting mid-September as compared to the beginning of October. So in this particular year, I submitted a biomass sample to AgSource, and that winter triticale had 6 tons of dry matter per acre. After that was harvested, we no-tilled in corn for silage, and we were able to harvest another 6 tons of dry matter per acre in October, and that corn silage was worthy of feeding to the dairy ration, to the dairy animals. For our area, 12 ton per acre dry matter yield on a field, even though it occurred in 2 different crops, is a tremendous amount of material. Now, not every year is like that, but we have found success in our double cropping scenario where we're harvesting for forage and then coming back with a corn crop that is oftentimes worthy of the dairy ration. Another thing that I like about these winter cereals is it opens up more opportunities for manure applications. In this scenario, we were using a Shootamaker to apply manure. Shootamaker is a low disturbance manure application, almost like pizza cutters. You can see those small slits on the winter triticale field there after the manure was applied, and that helps to get that manure into the ground and able to be utilized by the winter cereal. So we've got opportunities, potentially 2 in fall, in which we could apply manure. Another one in spring, like is pictured here, before that winter cereal gets too large. And then potentially after the rye harvested, and we've even put it on after corn has been planted. But it's not to necessarily have an application occur after all of those scenarios. It's just that we have more opportunities in which, if we couldn't get manure out in fall because it was too wet, it offers more windows of opportunity the next year, and taking advantage of those opportunities as compared to just a spring and fall application season. These soil health systems have, some of these observations are what I've got pictured in these pictures. The picture on the left was a plant green scenario, and you can notice the plant health all the way up to the water's edge. A lot of times in a conventional field, if we had this water puddle there, we'd have 50 or 100 yards of yellow stunted corn. And in this case, although the population obviously was drowned out with the puddle, the vigor and the plant health is almost equal right up to the water's edge. And then on the picture on the right, you can see the soil probe and the hole from when I had stuck that soil probe into the ground, only a foot or 2 away from the puddle. And I fully expected water to be dripping out of that end of that soil probe, but there was no water. It was a beautiful soil sample core, and it just shows you that these soil health practices are quickly occurring on our fields, even when we have after 1 year of implementing a soil health practice, let alone combining multiple years together. Another practice that we have one of our farms in the demo farms doing, Deer Run Dairy, is they use no-till to establish their alfalfa. Now, when we establish alfalfa, oftentimes there's very little residual left, and we've worked the field many times, resulting in pictures like this with mass erosion, and that's obviously not what we want to see. So, on the next slide, we'll show what Deer Run is doing is after a winter wheat crop, they will apply manure. Maybe it's surface applied, maybe they use incorporation. The reason for incorporation might be to address ruts because we want that alfalfa field to be smooth, but our cover crops establish much quicker than what our alfalfa does. And in that late fall or late summer, early fall, that's an ideal time for cover crops to get off into the races and help protect that soil. So if we needed to do some incorporation, level the field off, we got the cover crop planted, and it helps protect that soil for the next spring. It also helps relay those nutrients that we may have applied from a cover crop or from a manure application. So here is that no-tilled alfalfa. In the lower left, May 17th, you can see the young seedlings coming through. But on August 13th, you can see how much biomass and residual plant material was still down on that soil surface, helping protect that soil from eroding as the alfalfa gets started, knowing the alfalfa plant is slower to get established. But in this situation, it's much more protected, less susceptible to erosion, and it works very well. One of the challenges with this practice is we need to be thinking about our goals again. Do we have just a pure alfalfa stand, or are we mixing some grasses with that? If we're mixing grasses with that, we may need to think about our herbicide program and how we're going to get that cover crop to terminate. Maybe it's a higher and drier field, and in that scenario, maybe we only plant cover crops that are likely to winter kill and not survive the next spring. But just things we need to think about in the decision-making process. A couple other practices that we do here, we no-till corn into alfalfa the following spring. So instead of terminating that alfalfa in fall, we will plant corn, no-till corn the following spring. It helps protect that nitrogen, and it's kind of more like a plant green scenario. Here at Ebert's, a lot of times we will take first crop and then we'll strip till. That strip till helps loosen up the soil. But in between the rows, there is 20 or so inches of essentially no-till where we haven't done any tillage, allowing that corn to get off to a better start in the tillage zone, but also getting the benefits of no-till. It's kind of a compromise between the two. And oftentimes the next fall, we can't even feel the roughness of those soil berms, allowing us to no-till a winter cereal, continuing the no-till rotation. Here's just a couple pictures of some low disturbance manure applicators, Shootamaker on the left, a surface hay bar on the right, and the lower center is a Farm Star Bazooka, a little bit more aggressive, but in this case, Bry's were able to come in and plant into that field only 2 days later in a no-till scenario, and I believe they used a roller to help level the field back off a little bit. So there are options, and there's many more low disturbance manure applicators that are out there. At Ebert's, we've also looked at alternative forage systems, and there's lots of different options out here. For us, sorghum Sudan grass works very well under our pivots. The water being applied through the center pivot there is our leachate water. And when we think about sorghum Sudan grass in the middle of summer, oftentimes it's not as much about nutrients as it can be about watering that crop. And that leachate water is exactly that. It's low nutrient. There's a little bit in there, but it's more about getting that sorghum Sudan grass some water. And we've noticed big differences in yield, whether the pivot was there or if it was outside of the footprint of the pivot. Some of the effects we've seen of conservation is this radiating outward bullseye or drip of water. As farms practice new things, other farms watch. And on the next slide, we can see this is a NDTI aerial photo that was taken, an analysis of how green the landscape looked comparing 2010 to 2018. And we can see that greening effect as the lower Fox demonstration farms have utilized cover crops, and those practices spread out from farms that are practicing. At the DK demo farms, we did an organic matter test. So we started back in 2017 on 22 different fields that were GPSed. We pulled soil samples that went to AgSource. And the interesting thing about this was the increase in organic matter. 82% of the fields had an increase over just 4 years on the organic matter, anywhere from 0.1 to 1.4% increase on the organic matter, which is almost unheard of, but we can see that those soil health practices are increasing. There was only one field that decreased in soil organic matter in this study of 22 different fields. And with that, I've just got a few acknowledgements there. Lots of people that we worked with. I'm sure I've missed some. And I will turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about the soil samples that are available.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Your work at Ebert Dairy and your surrounding farmer-led watershed groups is some really perfect stories for our webinar attendees to investigate and see if they can start putting those together into practice in the upcoming years. So regardless of how healthy or alive your soil is right now, cover crops can provide a vital role in ensuring your farm soil health and productivity for as long as you farm. Let that sink in for a minute. I don't know anyone involved in farming who doesn't want to leave the soil better than they got it. So take a look at this map for where you live. Like I said, we have people that are outside of Wisconsin. And this was really close to what Nick was just sharing with the changes of land use for Brown County, which is by Green Bay, for where he lives. The darker shade of green is going to be areas of higher cover crop use. Is it really dark or is it light colored where you live? It has been exciting for me with my 12 years working for AgSource to see the same thing. The brown landscape, especially this time of the year in the spring, it turns amazingly green in the spring. In the 2012-2017 USDA agriculture survey, they asked a question about cover crops, which resulted in them finding that cover crop acreage had increased 50% during that time frame. And cover crop mixes were accounting for 18 to 25% of the acres that were using a cover crop. It's still most common to use a single species like we saw in Nick's examples with the winter rye. Following corn, almost 75% of the acres were using some type of a small grain that included cereal rye, winter wheat, or oats. And then of that, 44% was actually winter rye. After soybean, rye, and winter wheat were the most common. And if we have anyone from the southern states, winter wheat is the most common cover crop used after cotton. Look again at the green on the map. The cover crop adoption rate in the Midwest has increased from 1.8% in 2011 to 7.2% in 2021. But when I hear 7.2%, I'm like, Nick, I think that there's a lot more potential for cover crop use in the future. And we want to be the ones to help you make this be your first year or create a plan for you to use cover crops this season. Cover crops do have lots of benefits that you can see on the screen. And again, cover crops are an investment rather than a cost. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because if you were to look at only 1 year in cover crops, you may actually indeed show a loss. But it's like with any other farm purchase, cover crops can't just be evaluated on 1 year alone because they do have this compounding effect. Plus, one of the things that is really known from cover cropping is that they have this ability to make your soil more efficient and resilient during extreme weather. Like Nick, when he was talking about the very, very wet years in his area, they were still able to farm, although the ruts and stuff were not as impactful than people that weren't utilizing cover crops. Another thing that is noticeable for those that are in cover crops for a longer amount of time is how well the crops will do when there isn't rain and how the crop can reach down because there's higher infiltration. The water is going to stay either in the organic matter or in the increased pore space because of cover cropping. And we could see lots of pictures of how cover crops prevent erosion. There is lots of research that has shown that an average reduction from cover crops is about 6.5 tons per acre. And using like a conservative amount of $10 per ton, this could be a value of $65 per acre by just keeping your topsoil in your field. It is also known that cover crops provide for deep nutrient cycling. Cover crops will scavenge for nutrients that have leached deeper than most of our agricultural cash crops can reach during a growing season. Look at the image on the slide. It shows the nutrients that cover crops can commonly uptake. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and sulfur are the big ones. Cover crops are then going to store those above ground in leaves or a little bit in the tuberous roots. Then later, those nutrients are released to the upper layers of your soil when they decompose. Let's take a look closer at those roots and compare a monoculture cash crop to a diverse cover crop. The amount and density of roots underneath this cover crop is impressive. On the right side of the photo, compared to a monoculture roots on the left side. Many of the cover crops in my area are planted in September or even into early October. Once again, I'm in Wisconsin. Some of these cover crops are not very advanced in their growth by mid-November due to cold and a lack of growing degree days. Does this mean that your cover crops are worthless? No, because small growth on the top doesn't mean very little root growth underneath. A 4-inch tall ryegrass, annual ryegrass, dug up could have up to 21-inch deep roots. A tillage radish that only has a 2-inch tall top and a pencil-sized tuber could already have 15-inch deep roots coming off of it. And a legume like crimson clover can have 2-inch tall tops, but have 2-inch roots, and many of the roots had nodules on it that were already producing nitrogen. Imagine if the roots on your cover crops were given even more growing degree days by letting them grow into the spring as long as possible, and maybe planting green like Nick showed at Ebert Dairy. Imagine the benefits of the above ground weed control and what is left behind below ground to feed the soil microbes. Cover crops also aid in stabilizing the soil. They encourage higher populations of soil life, which is added to the carbon that is decomposing, both the above ground and below ground biomass. Again, cover crops are all about feeding your soil. The higher amounts of microbes, fungus produce a waste product, which is a protein that begins to glue your soil particles back together into aggregates. This creates more air and water space in your soil. Look at the photo on this screen. These fields are side by side. One had been practicing and using cover crops. The water was allowed to infiltrate in after a rainfall event because it had higher water holding capacity. Cover crops can increase water infiltration rates by 80%. In some soil types, this is the first thing that farmers will notice is how much softer or easier the soil is to plant. And there's no more surface crust. That surface crust is what captures the water on the roots or on the surface for longer, creating that ponding. Also, root penetration is reduced by 5%, and that's really important for all those delicate seedlings that you plant each season. Cover crops also tighten and enhance nutrient cycling, meaning over time your soil is going to start doing more work for you. This comes from the decomposition and bringing all of those nutrients to the top, back to the top layers of the soil for your cash crop. Research on cover crops at the Ruark lab at University of Wisconsin has shown that soil nitrogen does decrease over time in fields with cover crops, proving that they are uptaking nitrogen. With your local rep, make sure that you can work with them to find out which cover crops work best in your crop rotation and in your area. You still need to maintain good pH and good fertility to feed that cover crop so that you can get the most return on investment. So how much nitrogen can you grow with cover crops? While managing nitrogen is one of the challenging things that farmers will have to pay attention to when you add more cover crops into your farm, the aim is to have sufficient available nitrogen for your cash crop while not having a lot of nitrogen left over that could have an environmental consequence. To be upfront, nitrogen is always going to be higher if you have some type of legume or legume mix in your cover crop. Legumes can provide up to 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen, while cereal covers can provide up to 50 pounds per nitrogen in some high yielding fields. Most of that plant available nitrogen is released within 4 to 6 weeks after after termination. So planning your termination time is essential. And we heard Nick talk about changing your nitrogen side dressing for your cornfields, especially. You can really only know the nitrogen amount by doing a biomass lab analysis test, because it really depends on the stage of growth of your cover crop, the amount of biomass that you had, and what type of cover crop or cover crop mix you have. In general, at the lab, we do see that small cover crops who have really deep green leaves, for example, in the early spring, can contain about 3% nitrogen. And the nitrogen percent of a cereal rye tends to decrease the older that it gets. The temptation with some growers starting out with cover crops is to be able to start reducing your fertilizer rates right away. But nitrogen management can be tricky. Some cover crop practices are, and there are some measures that you need to ensure so that your cash crop doesn't suffer. Number one, diversity, diversity, diversity. A diverse crop rotation. So for example, if you're a corn and soybean grower on listening, just try to add a small grain into your crop rotation is a method of creating some diversity. This also increases the amount of soil life that's going to be in your field. Number two, strive for living roots year round. Keeping your soil covered means that you're protecting your soil life and it has plenty of home, food and shelter. Time. The longer that your fields are in a system with cover crops, the more the soil starts doing that nutrient cycling for you, and you will reap all of those benefits that I showed on an earlier slide. Number four, I also suggest using your own on-farm strip trials. So no one recommendation for nitrogen is going to work when you get into cover crops. You need to do some analysis and testing, and you need to look at each field and then use some replicated strip trials with no additional nitrogen and 2 lesser rates to help you adjust once you get more into cover crops. The cover crop biomass report is proof that your cover crop is paying you back. More biomass equals more, but how much? So you do need to manage your covers with detailed metrics, and there's a couple of complementary tests included, soil health and soil nitrate tests, in addition to the cover crop biomass test. Before we dive into the biomass report, you're probably wondering, how do you take a good cover crop sample? There's actually 2 different times that you can collect a biomass sample. One of them is at planting in the springtime. You're going to collect your sample just before termination, or as if you're planting green, right on that same day. Or you can take a sample in the fall. That's with any cover crop mixes that may have a species that's winter killed. So you're going to want to sample before a killing frost in your area. Once you're in the field, you're going to find a representative area of your cover crop to start collecting the sample. You can mark off a 2-foot by 2-foot area or a 3-foot by 3-foot area, and you're going to scissor clip everything that is above the ground and put that onto a tarp or into a bucket. It's really important that you take an in-field wet weight measurement. We don't care what the units are, but this is really important so that we can determine the pounds per acre of each nutrient once we analyze it at the lab. Then you're going to make sure that you fill out that information on your form, as well as include any information about your cover crop mix. So if it's just one species, what species in it, or what else could be in there. Now let's go back to that cover crop biomass test. On the top of the report is information that we transferred over from your sample form or the tissue bag. The middle provides 2 tests in one. One is the plant tissue on the left side, and the second is in the middle is the biomass analysis. I've seen agronomists and farmers review the plant tissue results and learn that they had actually a micronutrient that was short in the field that they could address in the upcoming cash crop before it limited yield. Now the guts of the biomass report. Here's a close-up of the cover crop biomass, which was the middle of that report before on the previous slide. This includes the pounds per acre of each nutrient the cover crop will eventually return upon field decomposition. The nutrients are shown in order of importance from the macronutrients of N, P, and K, your secondary nutrients of calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, followed by all of the micronutrients. Some agronomists are also able to share the report with the farm's nutritionist because it does have dry matter and biomass information that can be used by some nutritionists. Also on the bottom is your carbon to nitrogen ratio. Your lab result will trigger some comments to help you know if your cash crop will mineralize or release nitrogen quickly, or if it's a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, if you need to add additional nitrogen before the next cash crop. The carbon to nitrogen ratio of 24:1 rules in the soil. Why? Well, this is actually because it's the ideal microbial diet. Remember, cover crops are all about feeding the soil. They have very little to do about feeding your cash crop. The C to N ratio is very useful since there aren't really any book values for C to N ratios for cover crops because we have so many different planting dates and growth stages that might be out there depending on how it's used on your farm. Thus, your C to N ratio on the cover crop biomass report is a very powerful metric. And you should do this field by field, especially if planting dates are different. In the diagram, you can see that the top shows materials that have high C to N ratios. This means that they're really slow to decompose and often means that you need to work with your agronomist and apply nitrogen maybe a little bit earlier or in higher amounts than you have done in the past. And then the bottom of the chart are those things that will decompose very, very quickly. This includes dead microbes themselves. Using your cover crop can help drive your agronomy decisions. Testing is always a good idea to know the exact value of your cover crop as planting date and things change year after year. The report cannot, however, tell you when the nutrients will become available. This is so dependent on your individual environment, moisture, and temperature in that field. What about the cover crop roots? They definitely have value, but again, that's not included in the analysis because we only want you to clip what is above ground. Generally, in legumes, are nitrogen producing ones. They have 15 to 30% of the nitrogen that's actually left in the roots, and that decomposes and becomes part of a nitrogen credit. Where's the rest of your nitrogen going then? Actually, it's good news. It's staying in the soil and in your field because it's becoming used by your soil life to build up organic matter. Nick showed some really great results after 3 years of the changes in organic matter. And in general, we know that 1% of organic matter in your soil tests can equal about 10 to 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre that can be released. Here's a really good example from an Indiana farmer, Rick Clark. He is really into cover crops and he's also a numbers guy. So he farms about 7,000 acres and he no-tills into a living crop of cereal rye, which is his weed barrier. And his numbers are quite impressive. He burns less than half diesel fuel than he did in 2011, in 2018. His nitrogen fertilizer went from 220 pounds to acre down to 110. And his chemical cost in 2018 was $18 per acre. And he figured in 2019, it was only going to be $5. For the size of his operation, this all added up to $632,000 in savings. And one thing that's really unique to his operation is that he sacrifices an entire year in his crop rotation, and he calls it the regen year, where it simply is cover crop, a diverse mix of cover crop in that field for that whole year just to build up his soil. Thus, he's getting the soil to do a lot of work for him. In summary, with the annual and well-managed use of cover crops, it should start bringing about soil health improvements and improving yields, as well as saving on input costs that will accrue year after year. As Nick revealed, make sure that you surround yourself with experts, determine what works in your area, start small, maintain soil fertility when you're growing your cover crops, and have a plan for planting date, termination date, and a different changes for your chemical program. Also use tests to help you dial in your inputs. Use the PSNT or soil nitrate tests. Make sure that you're utilizing the cover crop biomass test, and soil health analysis is a really complementary test to it as well. You can start now by heading over to the agsource.com website where you can request sampling supplies and print the plant tissue submission form. You can watch a past agronomy webinar or locate your local AgSource laboratory or representative. And finally, for our CCAs that are listening, get your CCA app ready because the QR code is going to be on the next slide. And we're going to invite Kate back on to ask any questions that you've submitted in the time that we have remaining. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris and Nick. Yes, we did have quite a few questions coming in, and based on when those questions were submitted, I'll try and direct them to the presenter. I know we're a little over on time, but if you guys want to hang out with us, we welcome that. So the first question came in, Nick, during your presentation. For interseeding, if growing another grass beyond corn, pearl millet, or sorghum, what cover crops would you recommend interseeding with, or is it recommended?
Great question. I think it's going to depend on your area. Chris brought up a few good points right there at the end. Use what works in your area. Maybe start off small. Some of our alternative forage blends have incorporated clovers into sorghum mixes, pearl millets, so it's more of a blend. But if you're taking that crop to, say, a grain crop, that could be where I would suggest starting small and trying and see what works. One practice that's a little bit more common here in Wisconsin, although I wouldn't say it's common practice, my family farm, we do have a custom combining business, and my brother is not a big fan of interseeding winter medium red clover into winter wheat, because you could green up the crop and cause issues for combining. So in that scenario, I would suggest starting small. If it's for forage, maybe not as concerning. If it's for a grain crop, proceed with caution.
Thank you, Nick. So another question we had come in during Nick's presentation: have you calculated or established a scenario for nitrogen removal by any winter cover crops versus their root architecture that can help researchers and agronomists tell growers what direct benefits of cover crops for lowering nitrate leaching?
Another great question. I haven't done anything specific there, but a couple observational things. The pictures I had on the presentation from 2019 and how uniform that crop was, that corn crop was come the end of July, I think gives me some confidence that we are capturing that nitrogen and re-releasing it to the corn crop. The other one that I did not take a picture of, obviously this is going to be a little bit more observational, but when we have a late seeded or after a winter cereal crop, for example, and we have that length of growing season left, we've had winter or tillage radishes that look yellow and stunted when there's no nutrient, whether it be fertilizer or manure applied, as compared to when we surface apply manure, or on our own family farm, we've broadcasted a small amount of fertilizer out there just to get a little bit of nutrients to that cover crop. We've seen, the cover crops are taking advantage. There's a distinct difference between where nutrients have been applied and where they have not. And where they have been applied, those cover crops are growing a little bit better. But as to the specifics as to how much it's removing, I haven't done any studies that way or any research. Maybe some of our universities have. And another example or scenario for that, we could probably do some biomass testing the way AgSource is doing some measurements on cover crops and see how much nitrogen is actually in that cover crop in a with or without scenario.
Great, thank you. Nick, how do you know the amount of nutrients the cover crop is recycling for the next year's crop?
Kind of similar to the last question, I believe. And then I would re-emphasize on that biomass sample. From that example in 2021, where we had that triticale crop and tremendous yields, there was a huge amount of nutrient in that forage. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but those cover crops are utilizing a bunch of that nutrient. The other example I didn't share, and it would be in relation to the last question too, when we're pulling those PSNT tests for that corn crop in where we've planted green, the nitrate samples in that soil test have been extremely low, to the tune of 2, 3s, or 4s part per million nitrate, I believe is the analysis, and almost concerning. And that's why we did move up our side dress application of say 60 or 80 units of commercial nitrogen earlier than what we would have typically done. And it's because that PSNT was so low.
Thanks. In relation to your 2019 year that you shared so much about, was a cover crop established following the 2019 corn silage harvest?
It was. That farm was Augustine Farms, one of our demo farms. And just a quick story on that. And so Aaron was the guy that decided to participate. His dad is involved in the farm, and his dad made the comment in the spring of 19, I don't know if we should do this anymore. It's not very good. And when the fall of 2019 came, saw that increased ability to carry a load, the dad asked Aaron, are we planting the whole farm like this next year? So yes, winter rye was established after the corn silage harvest in 2019. And at Augustine Farms, they are almost 100% plant green and have been doing that for multiple years.
Great. Is a cover crop planted following a double cropped cereal forage and a corn silage are grown?
Here at Ebert's, we have quite a few acres where we do practice continuous double cropping. So we'll take the corn silage crop in fall, plant in a winter cereal, take that harvest in spring. Sometimes it can be the middle of June, but it's important to immediately get that next corn crop in. And we've been following that rotation on a number of fields. So yes.
Okay, back to you, Nick, because everyone has so many questions. If the cover crop isn't used as a forage, how do you use the biomass nutrient report for fine-tuning nutrient application decisions?
It's a good question. I think we can, if we're confident in how quickly that cover crop will decompose, and maybe on something that's more full season like corn, we can utilize some of that to, again, tinker with our nutrient applications. One of the other things that's on that biomass, I believe, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that carbon to nitrogen ratio. And Chris, you did a great job of explaining, where we should be with that, but we don't always end up there. So as we get more, a greater amount of carbon to nitrogen, we may need to actually apply a little bit more nitrogen. And one of the things that I've said is that the soil health isn't always free, and applying a little bit of nutrients for our cover crops goes a long ways. So I don't have an exact answer on there, but using the information that we have available to us can help dictate that.
Okay, can alfalfa be fall established with a winter kill cover crop following a small grain harvest?
I would think yes. Here in northeastern Wisconsin, we will often plant alfalfa in a late summer situation, and that's usually following a winter wheat crop. And we oftentimes have winter wheat that regrows. You will just need to monitor how much growth you're getting out of that cover crop and have options to terminate it. Here we're talking about a winter kill scenario, but when we think about that winter wheat followed by a late summer alfalfa, oftentimes we need to spray because the winter wheat is more competitive than what the alfalfa is. So it's not, and I've oftentimes said that our winter wheat, like you mentioned, Chris, in the Southeast, is a cover crop. It's a free cover crop that will regrow, but we need to monitor that so that way we don't smother out the alfalfa seeding and may need to interject with a herbicide application.
Okay, just a few more questions. Can sorghum Sudan grass be planted following a harvest of a winter cereal forage?
Absolutely. That's the practice that we're using under the pivots here at Ebert Enterprises. It's been continuous. It's a different scenario for double cropping, but it is that winter cereal forage immediately followed by a sorghum Sudan grass. And that field has been in long-term no-till and utilizing the leachate water for a number of years now.
Great. And Chris, this was submitted during your presentation portion. Are we assuming that the cover crop biomass test contains nutrients that were not already in the field?
So I would say yes, because these are some of the nutrients that they have scavenged from deeper than your cash crop can reach in their growing season. A lot of our cash crops are very shallow rooted. Corn does not scavenge very deep. Soybeans, they stay up in the upper layers and they're producing their own nitrogen, so they're not scavenging for much nitrogen. So yeah, I kind of think that definitely there are some that they can reach from deeper. And like I said, they're bringing that all up to the top layers again for the cash crop next year, and most likely becoming available when you can't get out in the field anymore. So tightening those nutrient cycles and really having that soil start doing more work for you in the long run. Maybe not the first year, but later.
Great, thank you. And our last question, Nick, is from a first-time cover crop planter. What's a preferred cover crop mix after wheat for a corn, soybean, wheat rotation? And would like a cover crop that doesn't overwinter and provides nitrogen for the next corn crop?
It's a great question. That's typically, or oftentimes what we follow, maybe not exactly, but on our own family farm, we have a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. You're throwing me for a little bit of a curveball on the not overwintering, but we have used crimson clover. So after our winter wheat harvest, we will plant a blend. And that blend consists of, I do like barley because it gets quite a bit of biomass in the later fall here in northeastern Wisconsin. That could be maybe more biomass than what you want to contend with. Crimson clover works really well here in northeastern Wisconsin. If we get any amount of snow, it will often overwinter, even though it's not supposed to. So it might be something we need to contend with in the corn herbicide program, and it's just something we have to monitor. But I would say our go-to mix at Guilette Farms would be the barley, maybe 15 pounds per acre. Winter rye is something I've added in. That's going to overwinter, 20 to 25 pounds per acre. Then I've got tillage radish at less than a pound, turnips for diversity at less than a pound, and maybe 2 to 3 pounds of medium red clover and crimson clover. Tinkering with winter peas, but there are ways, the challenge is, and Chris brought this up on her side of things, sometimes that legume over surviving the winter and allowing to grow a little bit more the next spring will get you more of that nitrogen credit. But again, depends where you're coming from, what part of the country and what type of season you have left after that winter cereal.
Great, thank you. That is all the questions we came in. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Chris and Nick for the great presentation on cover crops. And thank you to everyone who has joined in and tuned in. And you're also welcome to sign on to agsource.com to look at many other on-demand webinars that we have. Thank you so much for your time today, everyone, and have a wonderful day.